Facebook, family, and friends. What's going on, you guys? Good morning. We're a little behind today. Um, we are
Life happens.
right. We are definitely aware that we are late, but it's always for
Or
good
we're
reason.
right on time, depending on how you
Right,
look at it.
right. Uh, so every week we come out to you here at Formers. Sorry, I got a message from Lizzie. So you guys know we've been having technical difficulties here with our internet.
That's a Freudian slip.
Right, right. So we are now back in the loop, doing our thing. Got some big storms here. I just heard some pretty major thunder. Um, but anyway, so today we wanted to talk about something definitely in line with recovery, and that is the trauma loop. And Sammy, so explain what you mean when you talk about the trauma loop.
Well, let's know what we talk about trauma, but I don't know that we actually we think about trauma in a very particular way. And I think one of the most important parts to redefine trauma is that it's not a disorder. So there's a diagnosis called post traumatic stress disorder. I don't think that that's an accurate description, and there are a lot of professionals in the field who agree with me. It should be considered an injury, post traumatic stress injury. When you break an arm, the trauma you feel from that isn't a disorder, it's an injury.
Mhm.
And what they're trying to describe, I think, are what are called maladaptive responses to trauma. Right. So remember, we go back to that scenario I've always used about you were drowning when you were 5 years old. I throw you a yellow rubber ducky inflatable inner tube to help save you. You grab it, and when you were five, that was what it was available, and I threw it out to you, and you grabbed it and you used it and you saved yourself and you got to shore. Fast forward 30 years later, you're still wearing the yellow rubber ducky, although you've never been back in the water. Why are you that would be maladaptive, right? Like, why are you still using the same defense mechanism from when you were five, and why are you still wearing the rubber ducky all these years later, right? It wouldn't make sense. It wouldn't make sense to anyone. But if we take time to understand that happened from a traumatic event, then the reason it's important to understand that trauma is because then once we understand the source, the origin, we can start to peel away at the need for that defense mechanism, and in exchange for something that would be better for you today, right? More reasonable for you today, something that would make sense for you today. Um, on the other side of that are the maladaptive responses we have to those events. So, for example, um, if if you were drowning at five, you saved yourself, but because of your fear that came from that event, you've avoided all water for the rest of your life, right? See, that would be maladaptive. And so we'd have to not only take away the rubber ducky, but we'd have to figure out a way to hopefully help you overcome, getting back in a pool or in a pond or in a river or in a lake or an ocean if it was debilitating your life. Good morning, Amy.
Morning, Amy. Love you, Amy.
I want you to recognize Sunshine starts with S, which is closer to Sammy. So she basically said good morning to me first.
I hate you.
So now we need to understand how we're reacting to the traumatic experience. And this is an important part of the loop because it's a part of the reaction, right? And there, as we all know, there's a difference between a reaction and a response. But nobody really teaches us how to respond to trauma. I mean, honestly, let's think about this, right? One thing, when you were little, who taught you how to escape your home if it ever caught on fire?
My parents.
Honestly, did they really?
No, I think it was more like school and TV. Like,
but do you see, like,
yeah.
you're just expected to know how to do certain things, and people don't really talk about it, although we know the threat is always there. And then when it happens, what happens? Well, when that happens, what happens is we have a reaction because we haven't been properly prepared.
Right.
There's no book, right? There's no process that's been, here's step 1, here's step 2, here's step 3. We teach more people how to change a tire, which is very few, than we do how to escape a home
Yeah.
that might be on fire, even though you spend way more time in a home, right? We don't really practice these things. And so what we want you to do is just figure it out on the spot.
Right.
And it's just, or what we just put it outside of our heads. And, I think some trauma, the way we manage trauma can be a socialization process as well. And typically that socialization process will happen from home. Listen, if your family hasn't built resiliency or worked on resiliency with you from the beginning of your time with them, you're probably going to react in the other ways that they have showed you. So maybe your mom has mom and dad issues. Maybe your dad has mom and dad issues, and so you've been socialized and conditioned in watching them. Or maybe you watch how people deal with it at school, or your friends deal with it. And, some people don't talk. Like, I'm very quiet, and so I can see Samaya's very quiet, right? Like, so she's adapted. I've socialized her, and now I'm trying to be more conscious of that and encourage her to talk and be more open, right? But we're just socialized, and it's not something that people do on purpose. It's something that happens as a natural course of our interacting. Now, trauma happens. We haven't been prepared for it. It typically catches us by surprise. And here's where I think trauma, a lot of the trauma we're talking about, because there's all sorts of trauma, from accidents, from war, from violence, from falling,
Daily life.
Or abuse. But most of the trauma we're talking about is typically stemming from abuse. So while we spend our whole life being conditioned to be aware of stranger danger, the real danger is typically someone who is close to you, who has access to you. It doesn't typically come from. So that's an added element of the injury, is that somebody who was meant to be a resource for us actually ended up being a liability for us, right? They ended up abusing whether it's a family, a parent, an aunt, an uncle. You're more likely here's a really terrible way to start Saturday. You're more likely to be sexually assaulted by a family member than you are a stranger.
Yeah.
The younger you are, right? And here's another factoid. When a father is absent, the most likely person to physically abuse your child is the mother, right? And that's not a slight against moms. What that means is we know that there are dynamics of where this trauma comes from, and we need to be able to address them. That's why we have to talk about fathers being present in their children's lives, right? If you've gone to prison, your son is more likely to go to prison. If you smoke, your son's more likely to smoke. If you have a history of bad relationships, your children are likely to have a history. Like, we have to be aware of these things and be concerned about them enough to want to address them. But remember, all of that is a part of socialization. And by socialization, I mean what you're exposed to, which become teaching moments, whether they were intended to be or not, right? They become, because we observe and we see and we learn, right? And then we adapt based on that. And then we're probably going to imitate or mirror what we're seeing around us, right? That's just human nature. It doesn't always happen that way, but it does happen significant amount of times to be a correlation. So now we have a disorder, which is really, in my opinion, an injury that is based on a real world event. The event is based on reality. This really happened. These things really happened. But that exposure to that reality has kind of altered or created some sort of rift in our perception of reality. And and that reality also includes the perception of ourself. So when somebody hurts a small child, that child will often think that they did something to deserve that. So remember, if the child thinks I deserved that abuse, whether it was physical, sexual, mental, emotional, whatever it was, when that child is basically putting on that yellow rubber ducky I gave you, and will carry that throughout their life, believing that their self-worth and self-value is zero, that they don't have it. and they inherited that belief based on the trauma that they were exposed to, right? It's the way the brain works. Children think they're trying to control their environment because they have no control in their environment. And so to understand why somebody would hurt them, they often take the blame and say, well, I must have done something to make sense out of that event, right? Now, years later, here we are. So let's go back to the scenario I mentioned earlier on our call before we jumped in here. Think of every second of your life as a domino, and think how far back, or how long back that domino, file would be. Like how many dominoes? That'd be millions and gazillions of dominoes, right, over the seconds. What happens is, if I was 8 when this whole situation happened, and I'm 50 today, that's 42 years later. There should be 42 years worth of dominoes between me and that event. What I think happens as a result of trauma is that we pretty much take the domino from 42 years ago, we skip the line, and we put it right behind this one in this moment. So now the trauma seems to be constantly fresh, like a fresh event, like a new event, even though this is a 42-year-old event, because of where we put our association, our relationship with the memory of that makes it feel like it's right behind this very domino right here. And then this one, and then this domino, and then this down. And it just keeps leapfrogging with me in my life. So now I'm just re-experiencing the trauma over and over and over again in my mind. But I'm saying to myself, it's not that it's happening in my mind, it's happening to me, which means it's happening to me in my world, which means that the world is still a traumatic experience. You see that? Now there's the loop. Now you're caught up in this loop where there's no possible way to heal, and that thought is going to repeat itself, and that dynamic is going to repeat itself over and over and over and over again. Now, there are some theories out there that say the reason we repeat these episodes in our mind so that it feels like it's still affecting us today is because in some way, shape, or form, we're trying to replay it to perfection. We want to redo the moment in some way, like wave a magic wand over it so that there's a different outcome. But what is the reality of that situation? There's no magic wand, and there's no way to redo it, right? And so that can be a bitter pill where we have to accept that that's the reality. Accept that that's the reality. We spend our entire life trying to refuse and deny the fact that that was the reality, right? And so as a result, there's another dynamic that inserts itself in this process. That dynamic is one where we feel that the person who tried to destroy us, the person who hurt us, the person who abused their access to us, whether it was a parent, a sibling, a family member, an extended family member, someone in your community that was close to you guys, we think that that person in some way, shape, or form, and I'll get to how I think the most frequent way that we expect that to happen is, but we think that the person who tried to destroy us, the person who ruined us, the person who did that to us, needs to be a part of your rebuilding. And so we don't even bother to start rebuilding. Think about it. Because that's a major component in our mind that needs to be a part of this ability to freaking heal in my life, that person needs to be a part of it. Well, we know that 9 times out of 10, that person is either unavailable, unwilling, or unchanged. But then there's the fourth part of that whole dynamic that makes this wicked. We bank so much on the fact that if this person was a part of the healing process, that it would help resolve the process that I'm in, right? Help fix it. Only to discover that even when they do it, even when somebody nails the apology, nails the attempt at reconciliation, right? Nails the ability to express what they did wrong. Even if they did the gold standard of seeking forgiveness from you, what we typically experience after that moment is still empty. We still feel emptiness. It didn't do or serve us in the way we totally expected it to. So now we have what I call the great disappointment, right? Because you're like, son of a bitch. It's like fixing the car, right? You're like, I know what it is. And then you fix it and it's still not fixed. And then you're just like, oh man, now I got to start all over, or screw this car and I'm going to junk it, right? This is a part of life. This is a part of what happens. Now, as a result of that, what we're doing is now stuck in this loop, because we repeat this process, looking for the solution, looking for the person or the persons who've done this to us to be a part of the healing, even if it's because what we really want is for them to say, I was wrong. I did this. Hey, world, I'm guilty of this crime. I'm guilty of this atrocity. And we put so much on that happening that even when it happens, we come to find out it wasn't everything I thought it would be. Right? In fact, now I'm left even more disappointed, more empty, more hollow inside, because the great expectation was a lie. Here's the last part, and I'll let you jump in here. Even if we let the person be a part of our process of rebuilding, how could we ever trust that person to be a part of the rebuilding if at one point in their life they tried to destroy us? Now, they may have altered parts of you, but they didn't destroy us, right? But as a result of everything that happened, we've become isolated, we've become indifferent, we've become untrusting. We don't talk about the trauma unless it's in very negative methods and approaches to life. We have put the best parts of ourselves away in an effort to protect ourselves, to protect that little bit that we feel is there. And we bury it so deep that we can't even find it when we want it. There's a proverb that says, beware of the mask you put on, for you one day will forget how to take it off, right? And when you have to become something else other than the 8-year-old little kid who just wanted to swim in the pool but almost drowned, and now you need a yellow rubber ducky for the rest of your life, all you wanted to do is be able to play. That's all you wanted to do. You just wanted to be a person. You wanted to enjoy your life and freedom and live out the right to just be unharassed and unmolested throughout your life and to be safe. And you wanted the people who were closest to you to take care of you and be there for you. And they failed us too, right? In some way, shape, or form. And now we're waiting on everyone to get their shit together for us to heal, as if they need to be a part of the process to rebuild. And I'm here to tell you, no one needs to be a part of the process to help you heal that was there at the site of your destruction, or along the way when they realized you were destroyed or being destroyed and being harmed and failed you in whatever way they did, right? Which is typical. There were a lot of people who knew what we were going through who didn't say shit or do shit in a meaningful way, or maybe they gave their 2 cents of effort and then bounced, right? We were still there, still abandoned, still left to deal with this on our own. And here we are. Now, here's the good news. If we can learn to talk about what happened, that's the salve. We start to talk about the trauma. We have to be willing to face it. You've been running from it, but you realize you can't outrun it. You've been trying to outsmart it, but your thoughts hear your thoughts before you hear your thoughts. Right? You can't trick the voice when the person that's listening is inside of your head hearing everything you say. You have to be straightforward and be able to talk about it. That doesn't mean you have to do a major dump. You just got to start talking about pieces of it. You got to come to terms and acknowledge it. I got a message from someone. I got a message from someone about what I posted last night around this topic, and they just went on to say, like, yeah, I rethink this stuff every day. Remember what we said last week? The average thought, the average emotion lasts how long, Monte? So how it lasts 7 seconds. So how do we make a thought last 40 years? You're on mute. For the first time, you ain't talking. That's great.
We focus our energy on it. We focus our thought process on it. We
it's like a scratch record, right? It's like it's on repeat.
Definitely.
And you have to. So it's a match that you have to relight every second, every 7 seconds for the last 40, 50, 60 years.
Jesus.
You're just sitting there. 7 seconds. Oh, and then right, like we literally are rekindling this. Now, what that says is because we have the power to rekindle. You can rekindle matches that are even older than that. The ones that connect with who you were originally, who you still are originally. You
Yeah.
have to see the innate goodness in you, the innate spirituality in you, the innate strength in you. Look, if they could actually destroy you, you wouldn't have been suffering this long. Suffering is proof of life. And if they had actually destroyed you, you'd be dead.
Yeah.
But you're alive, and there's a part of you that has been fighting against you to stay alive. You can rekindle that relationship. You can choose what match you're going to relight next. And guess what? Because it's a memory that you can't erase. You need to change the association of that memory with what it represents today. Everything that held you down can one day hold you up. That is how we break the loop of trauma, in my word. That's in my 2 cents on the subject. I have more, but for the length of the show's sake, I will pause there.
What if trauma happened before you knew who you were? So
great question, but let's go back to the domino. You're still trying to answer a question from 40 years ago as if it's the domino here. What we need to be doing is answering what is relevant here. If it happened to you before you knew who you were, you are aware of that now. And that's where you start. You can't go back 40 years and try to unearth that answer. It's in this moment that you answer that question from where you are today, right? You get to redefine who yourself on any given day. You get to redefine what these traumatic events mean on any given day. We just have to be willing to. This is a trauma loop. This question keeps you in the loop because it makes it sound like it's impossible to undo what's been done because it happened before we were aware. Listen, my mom was 5 months pregnant with me when she tried to kill my brother and then picked up with me where he left off. I can't wait for that answer. Like, why? That it's an impossible dilemma question. You can't. There is no why. There is no how. What if it happened? The reality is it happened before you knew who you were. You have to be willing to accept that. But you're aware of that today. Your self-awareness about that today is more a part of the healing than that actual perception of when it happened. Remember, because when you start asking questions about the past, you're taking that domino that's way back here and placing it in this moment when it needs to stay where it starts at. Right. That domino. And you have to see that because recognizing the distance and space is healing. And here's why. This is an important concept to Anne's question. The closer you are to danger, the less safe you feel. If you can put that danger 40 years behind you, that's a lot of space to feel safe. Because we have to recognize, remember, the loop means I still feel like I'm in danger from that event because it feels like it's right here. But if I can put some space, like if you have a sphere of spiders, do you want to be closer to that spider or further away from that spider, right? That just makes sense, right? That's just natural sense, right? And so if you keep what's hurting you so close to you and attached and devoted to you, embracing it, you don't really create the space you need to feel safe enough to heal. Healing can't even start until you feel safe. What happened 40 years ago isn't why we don't feel safe today. It's our belief systems, it's our relationship with that memory that keeps us feeling unsafe, which is good news because that's not judgment. This is actually a dynamic, and this is why it's good news. Because if it's your belief, you have control over that. You don't have control over what happened 40 years ago.
Yeah, absolutely. I get that. Sorry, you guys. I've been letting Sammy go on it. In fact, this is more of an expertise area for him than it is for me. And so as you guys are learning about this, so am I, right? Like we're learning on this one together. Yeah, we had talked about my experiences in school back home in California, about the reports I made that were ignored. So I never understood what that meant until Danica started going to school. And my first thought was a complete and absolute distrust of the school system, of the educators, right? Unjustified. Well, from my experience, right? Different place, different world. But I didn't realize I'd held on to that fear, right? And that trauma and that injury from my childhood all the way through to Danica starting school and I'm 40 years old. It's been 30 plus years since this happened to me. And I had let it like affect my beginning feelings about her going into school. I kept her home. Well, everybody did what is it, pre-K, the peacock at 3. And my thought was, no, I'm not sending my kid to school at 3. I want her to continue with me until she's 5. You know what I mean? She can go to school in kindergarten like she's supposed to. And I kept her behind a year. I didn't enter into the school system. I didn't think she needed socialization. She was a very social child. She got along with other kids, played with other kids, got along with people. And I kept her. And it wasn't until I took her to school that I realized that my biggest fear of her going to school was my experience in school. It had nothing to do with reality. It had nothing to do with today. It had everything to do with my bad experience from 30 plus years ago that I held on to and just, continued to let affect me. And once I did let go of that, well, I didn't lose it, but once I let go of that mistrust and that fear and that initial feeling of concern for my daughter, it went well. She goes to a great school. She has great teachers. She has an even better principal. She has guidance counselors that contact me. And, Danica had a slight speech impediment, so they put her in IEP for speech therapy. And her therapist is like this amazing person. You know what I mean? Like, her experience in school is not my experience. Her experience at home is not what my experience was.
Well, a little bit of it was,
Yeah.
but you're re-socializing that now by living a better, healthy life now.
Yeah. So yeah, it definitely, the subject when we talked about it before, like, resonated with me because I'd carried so much over from my past. I'd carried so much over from my experience. Not, what's fucked up about it is by doing that, I didn't get to enjoy things as much as I should have, right? Because I had that fear, I had that trepidation. I carried those things over, and it took away from the joy of some of the stuff that I could have had a much better time at. Even though I had a decent time, how much better would it have been if I hadn't carried that baggage with me, right? And just let it go. And so once I did let that go and started accepting that things weren't the same for her as they were for me and weren't going to be the same, I have a much more fun time with her school, with her education, So yeah, I dig, bro. I dig. It's hard, especially when in recovery, right? Like, we're dealing with all of the injuries that we received during our self-inflicted or otherwise during our addiction, and we carry that.
But I would tell you, it's not as hard. What we're doing in recovery is not as hard as what we
As
do to
carrying.
ourselves when we're not in recovery.
Yeah.
Right? It's what we do without recovery or help or counseling. That's the hard part because we're associating our current suffering status with a past incident when it's really our current status of thinking about the past incident than it is the past incident, right? Like, that's an important factor here. The incidents or incidences that have led to whatever is going on in your life today are in the past. Even if it was just 5 minutes ago, it's in the past. Everything moving forward is a process of processing, of thinking, of creating. What there's a great researcher out there named Sari. She says we create meaning with every new experience, and so we assign meaning to what happens. So, you get a call you get a call that someone you love passes away. as soon as you hear that, all of a sudden your brain kicks into trying to understand, what does this mean? And then it has 10 million filters it's got to run it through, and each one of those filters will have a different meaning. But then what you'll find is a theme. What's the overall theme of how we interpret this event? So if your childhood was the worst thing that ever happened to you, it's going to remain the worst thing that's ever happened to you. Or it can be the thing that you stand on today that helps you build a better life. Because of your past experiences, Monte, you have spent 400 years in prison. And now, because of your past experiences, you are a better father. Do you see what I mean?
Yeah.
It's so what changed? Because the past experience didn't change. Your parental upbringing didn't change. The abuse you suffered, the neglect you suffered didn't change. So why aren't you still in prison if it was the event that caused that?
Right.
Well, it's because you've changed your heart, your mind, and your spirit in how it relates with that. And it's the association we have with it. Right? It hasn't changed all these years, and that's maladaptive, right? The association has to change, not the meaning of the actual event. Like, we're not reducing or minimizing what happened. It happened. There's no two ways about it. My mom tried to kill my brother, tried to kill me. She let her brother rape me and my sister. There is no two ways about that. And that drove me to great insanity. I drove myself further down the path of insanity when I finally started thinking for myself. But the same thing that built me down is what's building me up here. Nothing has changed other than my word association, my thought association, my emotional association, my spiritual association with those events. Those were bad events, but I have assigned value to the meaning because I found experience and wisdom, experience and knowledge, which is now serving me as wisdom. It's everything that I've written, everything that I've shared is as a result of the very worst moments in my life that are now the biggest teachers, right? It's through service work. So I saw that Ann posted something.
Here.
You know, there's nothing there. This is yes, and this is normal. This unfortunately is exactly what happens, right? But here's the thing. There are triggers. We can't help the association with triggers. We can help the way we respond to those triggers, right? So before I was calling it PTSI, post-traumatic stress injury, I was calling it post-traumatic stress disorder or PTSD. Before, my PTSD would result in heart racing, crowded thoughts, racing thoughts, and a sense of I felt very powerful, as if I was about like not powerful like in a bench press kind of way, but like I was like a ticking time bomb. I could feel the energy building up that I was going to release, boom, and blow. I have this blow up, right? Today I don't have that as much. So I want to validate your experience. It's that is to be expected. I understand. And it sounds like it's something that you didn't have to really face all this time until now. But it doesn't have to remain, a traumatic memory only. It will be a traumatic memory always, but that's not the only thing it has to be. It can be something that helps you connect with life more. It can make you hug your kids tighter, love them better, love yourself better. Look, I'll tell you what trauma did to me the most, that has been the last piece of layer of peeling back. And I think Monte can relate to this. I'm a loving person. And even when I was in the gang, I was a loving person because I did a lot for people I loved within my brotherhood, my so-called brotherhood. I laid my life on the line. I sacrificed decades in the name of love, right? I would beg to differ now that I'm a little more aware to it. However, what I'm saying is I could express love then. What I couldn't accept was that I was lovable, right? And go back to what I said earlier, Monte. When we're small, and people hurt us, we start to think something's wrong with us.
Yeah.
And that was the last vestige of memory that I had left over to overcome in my life. And as soon as and you're probably one thing, you could probably go back to a period where my friendship with you deepened, and it came as a result of talking with Julie, and Julie said, "You know, he loves you, Sammy." And I had not ever filtered our relationship through that lens until she said it. And then when she said it, it was like, I either have to accept that or I'm rejecting it.
Mhm.
And it meant that I had to be able to trust again. And you saw, I mean, in the little time you've known me, you've seen how many people have hurt me, and it was just pointless, like pointless.
Yeah.
Hurt. Like I don't live in a way that people should want to talk shit about me or hurt me or betray me or whatever that is. But those dominoes look a lot like the ones from 40 years ago, and either I'm carrying those dominoes or 40 years worth of dominoes.
Yeah.
I chose to carry those dominoes separately from 40 years ago, so that was 3 or 4 dominoes instead of I don't know how many millions of dominoes. That's a lot of weight, right? Ivory dominoes are heavy, right? And then here we are today, and it's like, okay, I can actually have a good relationship with people. I deserve to have a good relationship with people. I deserve to be loved by people. But it's the trauma that makes you feel like I'm not a loving person. And why? Because it's the moral dilemma. The question that Anne asked to me, it creates a trauma loop, right? For example, if God is good, how could God let all this happen? That's a traumatic loop.
Yep.
It's an unsolvable dilemma, and we feel that because of our limited understanding of the way things work, that it's an impossible situation, and therefore disproves all other things. All other things, no gravity, no up and down, no night and dark.
World is flat.
The world, it disproves everything because we're so uncertain about the world. We're trying to validate that the world is uncertain, right? But when you have more confidence, it's because your ego, yeah, Amy, spot on. Ego and not arrogance. People confuse arrogance and ego for the same thing. That is not what ego is. And we've talked about ego many times on the show. But our ego would have us believe that unless the world is perfect, it's not worth living in. Right? And so when we think about what happens in our life, if we think that the world isn't worth living in, then we don't feel that we're worth living. And so we basically live a life of loneliness and isolation.
Yeah.
A slow death.
Yeah, I remember when we first met. It's been almost 10 years, and I didn't like you. I did, right? I dug what you were saying. I dug the message. I dug the change you had made in your life. But, you're an abrasive dick, by nature. But I respected you. And I think I allowed myself to care about you when I realized you really didn't care about anything but my life being better, even though you really didn't invest. We weren't invested in each other deeply, right? Like we're good, we're buddies. I help you out, you help me out, we dig. And then when I realized you were sincerely just concerned with my life being better, like me not going back to prison, me not hurting, me not, reoffending or falling apart or losing my kid, I think that's when I understood that I cared about you. And then we went through what I went through with Danica. And that's when I realized this is my brother, right? This is family to me. This is a guy who is truly a brother, unlike what we believed were brothers before, right? Like you had the right idea. You wanted me to have a better life. You didn't want me to hurt people. You didn't want me to be hurt, right? And
there was more to life.
Yeah, right. Like whoever thought that when we were growing up, that there was more than pain, suffering, trauma, hurting people, being hurt, like it was an expected situation. I remember when one of the guys in my little clique and I were sitting down and talking, and he was like, "Bro, not all brothers are your brothers. And why do we call them brothers? Right? Because they wear the same patches we do, like because they spout the same stuff. If I can't trust and love them, then how are they my brother? Right? Like, yeah, no, I dig.
I want to touch on what Ann just said, and I think, and this is for you to go reflect with if it works for you. Now that you're aware of all of this stuff, now the healing can take place, right? A lot of times we're filled with shame and guilt. We associate our reaction to trauma with shame and guilt. Which what do we do with shame and guilt? We hide it, right? We try to bury it, and then there's another cycle. There's another loop, right? I want to feel better. I use so I can feel better. I sober up. I feel worse. Makes me want to feel better. I use so I can feel better. I use. I feel worse. Right? It's this loop, right? It's all these loops, right? And so now that you're aware of it, do something about it.
Yeah.
It's don't talk about it for the sake of talking about it. Talk about it for the sake of doing something about it. Like that has to be the spirit. Like whenever you talk about this stuff moving forward, and my recommendation would be to say, I'm going to talk about this to shed, right? And even if it's just a little bit, we're just shedding a little bit. I'm going to shed what I can from this, right? I struggle with that one too, Amy. You know, and it's not such a big struggle as it was in the when I first took this on, because I didn't realize I didn't feel lovable because I was too busy being lovable, being loving.
I think all of us in recovery have that issue, though.
Oh
like,
yeah,
we just don't believe we have the right to be cared about, like
value. I mean, because we've diminished it so much,
right?
And it's been diminished through traumatic experiences, right? That's the socialization. See, what you just said, Monte, is the socialization piece that we have to overcome, because trauma brings a message that says I can do this to you because you don't have the value of a human being, right? We have to be dehumanized for some of the traumatic experiences that we've had to happen. Freud says this, man, and this Monte, when I heard this, I got that book right there. Here, this book right here, this big ass psychodynamic psychiatry, right? It says the shadow of the parent falls on the child. Think about that, man. Right? The shadow of the parent. Now, the parent doesn't necessarily have to only be the parent. It can be anything that had power or force over you. Anything and anyone. That can be an institution like government, race. Institutional racism could be the parent. The neighbor that Ann's talking about could be the parent. Law enforcement, Department of Corrections,
the husband.
And what we do, and so here's what Freud says. This is kind of creepy. Freud says when the parent hurts us, we know that we can't kill the parent, but we want to. So here's what we do. We consume the parent, which basically means you take on their traits. Mm-hmm. So if the parent is telling you you're not worthy, you're not good, right? When you consume it, there's a voice in your head now that says you're not good because you've consumed their propaganda. You've consumed their ideology because remember, their behaviors towards you have an inherent message, but it's not meant for us. But we don't know that. The message was delivered and we were too small or too, naive to really know what it meant, right? And so, like Amy saying, the husband or whatever, whoever that parent is in our lives, we consume it. And then here's what we do. You ready? We try to kill it from within. Think about drinking. You're trying to drown it. Literally trying to drown the parent that's inside of you. Right? But as that proverb says, seeking revenge is like drinking poison and hoping your enemy dies. Right? Because you drink it. And what do they mean? It's the same thing Freud said. The enemy lives within because we consume it, we own it, because we think that's the way to destroy it. And so we, one, become like them, or we spend our life trying to keep them a prisoner that we can kill. But you recognize by now there's no way to kill it. All you can do is make peace with the memory, not the event. That comes through forgiveness. Right now we're just talking about healing trauma. And forgiveness is not, again, just like the traumatic healing process, forgiveness is a process that is independent of the people or situations that have hurt you. It's an intimate affair between you, yourself, and I. Right? I'm trying to see who's OMRN. Do you know?
Yeah, it's Cat.
Oh, okay. Yeah, and those are natural reactions, right? But see, what this is amazing to me, because here we're saying, here's what I do when I'm having trauma, right? The next step now is to say, here's what I'm going to do about what I do. I want to repeat that. If you can say, here's what I do, here's what I've been doing, even if you're still doing it, right? If you're still like burying it in sex, burying it in alcohol, burying it in crack, whatever it is you do, right? If you can identify that that's what you do, the next statement needs to be, and you guys should start typing this right now. If you know what you do when you're experiencing trauma, the next step needs to be, here's what I'm going to do about what I do when I experience trauma. One way to do is interrupt the thought. A lot of ways to do that, right? Count to 3, snap a rubber band, take a cold shower, go for a brisk walk, pick up a book and just read out loud, even if you don't know what you're reading. There's a million gazillion ways to pick up the phone, go to somebody's house and talk, call a counselor, go to a meeting. There's a million ways to interrupt this process. From now on, I want you to say, here's what I do when I have trauma. I sleep around, I drink, I dope up, whatever it is. But the next, and this is FA, right? This is what FA wants you to do. This is what we're pushing you to do. 20% about the problem, 80% about the solution. Right? That's what I'm talking about, Amy. See, that is the recovery piece. Right? That here's my problem, here's what I'm going to do about it. Step 4 is very simple in FA. It's not easy, but I've tried to make it simple. I love that, Anne. Recognition, realization, but with action. OM, right? It's got to be, we recognize and we realize all the time, but we don't take action. So now we're just paralyzed with this recognition. Remember, the main part of this is, what are you going to do with it now that you know what you do with it? Right? When I want to stop yelling at my kids, right? Like, because I used to yell a lot as an early parent. What I started doing was telling them, I'll be right back. I had to interrupt it. And, change comes in 3 steps. After the fact, when you realize you did it and it was too late, but you're going to try to do something. During the fact, I'm in the middle of yelling and I'm going to stop myself and walk away. And then before the fact, where I realize I'm about to start yelling, so let me stop before I get there. Right? These are the processes that we're going through. Step 4 says this. Let me summarize it. Here's where I am. I'm doing all these bad things because of trauma. Right? I do all these things that don't serve me because of trauma. Let me change that. I'm not trying to be judgmental. Here's where I'd like to be. That's called hope, right? I would like to be able to do something else other than live with this feeling, live with this memory, and only have that memory affect me in bad ways, right? So here's where I'm at. Here's where I'd like to be. That kind of vision. It takes vision. And see, Monte, vision, is that moving forward or backwards?
Always forward.
Right? So there's no reason to go back 40 years to collect the domino that said this happened to you before you were aware of who you were. That's not vision. That's a memory. That's a traumatic memory, right? And so we need to reassociate with vision. So here's where I'd like to be. And then the third step is here's how I'm going to get there. And so now we're saying I like to call my friends, I go shopping, I ride a motorcycle, I go sit at the lake, I've been drawing, right? That's how I'm going to get there. Those simple things do several things. They associate a bad memory with a positive action as opposed to a negative action, like using. So the memory can trigger a positive action. What held me down can now hold me up. That's the positive action. The trigger then loses power because normally we feel paralyzed by the trigger. But now the trigger will now motivate us to take a different action other than freezing.
Mm-hmm.
Fight or freezing or respond. We don't have to do any of those things. We can choose to respond. I'm just pissed. I need more of this, really. I do. And anger is justified. Anger is justified. But I'm going to tell you right now, I can tell you're not just pissed. There's a lot of good in you. But anger is justified. You should be mad, and you're allowed to be mad. Right? Like plain and simple.
I think that's hard for us in recovery because we think we're not supposed to be allowed to be mad. We think we're not supposed to allowed to feel anger. And especially for people with problems like
why? Why won't they? Anger leads to what?
It depends, but for you and me,
what does it lead to for us? Yeah.
It leads to violence.
See, it's the association we have with it, just like with trauma. Right? When I was in martial arts, and I've been in martial arts for a long time, right? My coach was saying, you have a reluctance to hit. And he helped me realize that I had an association with using my fist with violence, which is not the same thing as self-defense or protecting someone. Right? You have to revisit that. You have to be able to talk about it to reassociate it with something else. Trauma for you is associated with the past. Trauma for us is associated with recovery. Two very different perspectives on dealing with the same thing. Trauma is a part of your recovery, right? Or masking pain with anger. Yeah, anger is never the root. Typically, it's something else. And I think you just told us everything about what it was. Being pissed is not easy, but it's easier than. And at the same time, you have every right to be pissed, but you know that there's more beyond that.
Yeah.
That's a part of it, a part of the healing. That's a part of the process. Don't be worried about it. It's okay to be mad. But eventually you'll become more consumed with something else that will actually rebuild you. And you are the only one that can heal that hurt right now. No one else should be a part of that. And by that I mean people of the past. The people who should be a part of it are like recovery groups, your therapists, counselors, mentors, people who love you and care about you. They should be a part of it because that you're using them as testers for your ideas about what steps to take next, right? And they can validate or whatever. You still make up your own mind, but you're right. When the being angry is for us is associated with prison, breaking out in handcuffs. Right? I'm allergic to being angry because I break out in prison sentences, right? But the reality is it's a normal, healthy reaction. There's a time to be angry. There is righteous anger, right? But we're not concerned with righteous ego righteousness. We're concerned with just validating that what was done was wrong. It's okay. But you're also, I'm going to guess there's 20 other emotions associated with all of that, not just being angry.
Yeah, no doubt. We had talked about the fact that in 2002, I was transferred from Green Bay Max to RCI, and I was incarcerated with my dad. And it was the first time in my entire life that I had known my dad clean and sober and could remember, right? He had never been without heroin. He had never been without coke. My entire life, he had been using, and which led us to our separation and then us re-meeting in prison and being together in prison. And he had explained the cycle of addiction in the exact manner that we were just talking about it. Like we're sitting on the yard, smoking a cigarette, talking about life. And I don't know why I brought the subject up. I was like, Dad, and I told him, this is the first time I've ever sat down with you for longer, than 10 minutes, and you're clean and sober. Like, he had been sober for a year and a half, in prison. And he started crying. And I never seen my dad cry often. You know what I mean? It wasn't a big thing for him. But he cried, and then he explained it. He was like, when I'm out there, I hate myself for what I've done to you guys and others. He was like, and so I use, because it takes away the hurt, it takes away the pain. I forget. He was like, I wake up and it's worse because I failed again.
It's that loop.
And he would continue. And that was the first time I ever consciously had to forgive someone. You know what I mean? Or think about it. Is it worth is it worth carrying on this trauma that I'm feeling inside, right? Because as he's crying, I'm crying as well. And it's like, I'm angry, but is it worth all of the weight that I put on it for all these years, right? For all my life. And it wasn't, right? It was much more valuable to me at that point to say, you know what? I never thought about that. I didn't understand how that worked. Give me a minute. You know what I mean? And we became really close, closer than we ever were, and we were close. You know what I mean? And it led me to understand a lot about myself, right? Like, when I would hurt people, I would forget how I felt, right? When I was fighting, when I was doing things like that, I could just let it all out, like a dam exploding with rage, right? Like, it would just come out and it would be gone for a second. And sometimes for people in that kind of mindset, a second is a million years. Like, I don't have to feel this for 1 second.
So remember that 1 second is all we're associating with all the millions of dominoes behind it. That's why it feels so heavy.
Yeah, I dig, man. Ann, I've known you since what? I was 15. You've been an amazing friend. So, Amy, I don't know what I'd do without you some days. Like, I definitely have learned how to deal with my anger in a way that I'm content with, right?
Well, let's add to that though. You just didn't learn what to do with it. When you healed in all these other ways, you had more resources to handle it.
Yeah. My choice funnel is so much larger.
Well, and not just that. It's so if you think of all the chess or a checkerboard with all the pieces on there, right? If that's all the energy you ever have in life to deal with all the things in your life, if you're so focused on traumatic experiences of the past, all your energy is focused on that, and there's nothing left over to deal with today's stuff.
Right.
So when you start sorting through that, what that does is allow some of those pieces to free up so that when things happen today, you have more internal resources to handle today. It's amazing how that works, right? The proverbial crying over spilt milk.
Yeah.
Right? Why would anybody cry over spilt milk? Well, because I didn't have anything in me to handle something so small, so trivial, because all of it was directed somewhere else that wasn't serving me. It was no balance, right? And so as you started to work through your issues, Monta, as you started to, don't just make it a moral issue around learning. The healing allowed you to do what everyone else who doesn't do that does, which is deal with your day-to-day stuff better. Yeah. Not because you're not so pent up about the past, you're not so pent up about today. It's so weird. It's weird how that works, but it's infectious, right? It works that way. So you've healed, which is why you have learned, but you've also healed in some ways and are still healing, but it allows you to do better today. That's an important part of recovery. That as we tackle these serious, significant issues in our life, it makes today at first more bearable, but then we discover there's so much more beyond that.
Yeah.
And so when you avoid the counseling and the counselors like the plague, remember, we just talked about this. You can't just drop those kind of lines anymore. What are you going to do about what you do now that you recognize what you do? Right. And it doesn't have to be a counselor, it can be people you trust too, you know? So, um,
What did she say? I waited so long to start with all this mess. Like, I did treatment with you, Sammy. I did ERP, and I waited so much, like, not wanting to talk about it. I just want to be fucking normal. I just want to be happy for whatever time I have left here on this earth. I want.
Perfect. So that's step one. That's step four, right? Here's where I'm at. Here's where I'm at. Here's where I'd like to be. That's what you just said.
Yep.
Right. The first part of the paragraph. Here's where I'm at. Here's where I'd like to be. Now you need to determine how you're going to get there. Because right now, here's what I suspect is happening. Right now, you're just dumping, right? You're sharing the dump, but you're not thinking about the next step. For recovery to start, you've got to start. You can't just dump because that's what we do. Facebook is full of people with dump trucks.
Yep.
Right. What we need it's important. It's a part of the healing. You have to start talking about what I'm doing or going to do about my problems. You can't just say your problem. That's not functional. That doesn't work. It's an important part of the process, but it's an incomplete thought. Right? Monta, you said earlier, this is hard. What have I always said? When you say this is hard, you need to finish the sentence with, but it's necessary. Don't stop with the problem, stop with the solution. Finish every problem with what the next step is going to look like.
Damn right.
We have to do that. That is a recovery process. And I think that's why groups can get sick, because all anyone does is come there to dump.
Mm-hmm.
That's not enough. They cannot just dump. You don't take a shit without wiping your ass. You got to wipe your ass. And you have to finish every shit with ass wiping. Right? A little vulgar there, but it's not enough to just dump. Okay, we get it. We understand. Shit is bad. Shit is hard. It's been fucked up. You've been fucked up. You've done fucked up things. Fucked up things have been done to you. We all know that. That's why you're here. That's an assumption we all make. We want to hear it. We want to listen. We want to hear, but we also want to push and encourage you.
That's exactly right, Kat.
To start thinking about what you're doing next. What's next? Not what is, what was, right? We're closer when we go from what was to what is, but the final solution is what's next.
Yeah, no doubt.
My 2 cents on a very complex issue.
Well, you know what? I definitely enjoyed today's talk. And if you're with us today, go ahead and like and share that thought, share that 2 cents. I met with somebody I had met before the other day at Topper's Pizza. Scott Gitrich is the founder and CEO of Topper's Pizza. I met him early on in my recovery, right after I came home from prison, when I was working at Topper's on Washington Avenue, and he had mentioned then that he was in recovery and had been in recovery since 1993. And I stopped and I thought about that.
And make sure you tell everybody he gave you permission to share that.
He did. We just spoke about it, and he said he was very glad that I talked privately about it and that it affected me so well and so much. And we talked about it, and he'd been in recovery since 93. He had failed several business attempts prior to creating Toppers, and he got into recovery. He got sober. He got clean and created Toppers, and it just went from there. Like, now they got 71 stores, across the country. He just got done doing a world tour, him and his wife. And I told him how inspiring it was and how much it meant to me. And he smiled, he gave me a hug, and he was like, it was funny. He said, when he started Toppers, he had a no felon policy. Like, he wouldn't even imagine hiring somebody with a criminal background. He said that, when Justin told him about me and about my past and about my background and that he had hired me, that he thought it was a horrible idea. And then he hugged me and he said he was so glad he was wrong. Right? Like, they changed their policies because of that. And I felt very flattered. I felt very honored. And I share that because I think a lot of us who are in recovery or who have been incarcerated carry that domino that we're not able to be better, right? That we're not able to achieve more, that, we carry that injury that says we can't be successful, not in a real sense. And it was enlightening and heartwarming to me when Scott shared that with me. And, the 12 step is what? Spread the word.
Message, man. Taking that message to others, That's why we do this every Saturday.
Every day.
So I think we should wrap up with Kathy's mention here. Spring is coming. Right? Like, that's what you think about when it's cold.
Yep.
If you think about that it's cold, you won't even stick around for spring. Right? That's the message of hope. That is the ultimate verse, in my opinion, when we're dealing with shit, is that we can see that there are better days coming, man. And they are.
Every day. All right, you guys. Again, we'll be here next Saturday.
Amy, aren't you a felon? I'm pretty sure you are. Should be. Should have been if you're not.
Amy is such a unique individual. Like, she's got this gangster, yet right, thug as shit, but mixing with the stars, right? Like, she get down all the way around, man.
Amy was like what I would imagine the daughter of a mobster.
Yeah.
Trying to not be a mobster.
While running her own crew,
right? Being a mobster, but trying to be a kinder, softer, gentler mobster.
And we love you, hon. Just a criminal traffic stuff.
Yeah, okay.
Love you.
Okay, Amy.
Love you, Kathy. Amy.
Amy's
Thank you guys for coming on here every Saturday morning with us. Like,
look, it's great that you're here, but share this, man, far and wide. Put it on your social media. Talk about it on Twitter, on TikTok. Like, it's important. We're trying to scale these messages, and the only way we can do that is by expanding the audience, and we can only do that with your help. So,
right.
That's right, Amy. That's why you're smarter than Monte.
Oh, just me, huh?
just you.
All right, I love you guys. We'll see you guys again next Saturday. Thanks for everything. Again, remember, Thursday nights, 2005, Lathrop Avenue, Racine, Wisconsin, Mount Sinai Gym. See you there. Otherwise, we'll talk to you guys next week.
All right. I got to go celebrate my birthday. Peace out, y'all.